May 1945, a Bavarian village outside Munich. Rain falls on the muddy cobblestones. A lone American soldier stands outside a massive stone villa, his uniform soaked through. He guards a group of shivering, displaced people. Inside the dry, warm house, a captured German officer sits by a roaring fire, drinking stolen wine. The German demands the American soldier immediately clear the low-born refugees from his sight. He refuses to look at them through the window. He wants them gone. The American soldier says no. The German promises trouble. He claims his aristocratic status protects him from such indignities. But a general is already on his way to this village. General George S. Patton will soon teach this captive exactly what his status is worth. He will ensure the German gets a very close look at the people he despises. This is the story of what happened when an arrogant captive officer demanded special privileges. And General Patton gave him exactly what he deserved. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when old hierarchies met new realities. Private First Class Arthur Vance was 21 years old. He came from the coal valleys of Hazard, Kentucky. He belonged to the 328th Infantry Regiment, 26th Infantry Division. Before the war, Vance broke his back loading coal cars alongside his father. He joined the army to see something beyond the black dust of the mines. Instead, he saw his older brother perish on the beaches of Normandy. He saw his best friend freeze to death in the snow outside Bastogne. Vance himself carried a jagged piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder from a mortar blast in the Saar region. He was tired, lean, and homesick. Now, he stood in the freezing mud of a Bavarian courtyard. His boots leaked. His hands were raw. His rifle felt heavy against his side. He was responsible for 60 displaced refugees, who had nothing left but the rags on their backs. Major Friedrich von Schill was 44 years old. He was a staff officer from Potsdam, descended from a long line of Prussian aristocrats. He believed his bloodline made him inherently superior to everyone around him. His family crest had been carved into the gates of his ancestral manor since the 17th century. Von Schill often stated that the common masses existed only to serve the nobility. He wore a tailored wool uniform that smelled of lavender starch. His riding boots were polished to a mirror shine. An iron cross hung neatly from his collar. Even as a prisoner, he demanded the finest accommodations. He refused to sit on the standard wooden crates provided for detainees. He claimed a man of his lineage required proper upholstery. He spent his afternoon drinking vintage Bordeaux from a crystal glass by the fireplace. He looked out the window at the muddy courtyard with pure disgust. By May of 1945, the European theater was a landscape of absolute ruin. The German war machine had collapsed into nothingness. The Third Reich was dead. Millions of displaced civilians, freed laborers, and surrendered soldiers flooded the roads of Bavaria. Towns were crowded. Food supplies were almost entirely depleted. The infrastructure of the country had completely shattered under the weight of Allied bombs. Amidst this vast operational chaos, American units had to act as police, doctors, and governors all at once. Small infantry platoons suddenly found themselves managing entire villages with zero outside support. In the final weeks of the conflict, many frontline commanders grew weary of the endless bureaucracy. They wanted to go home. Because of this exhaustion, certain infractions began to slide. Arrogant captured officers frequently took advantage of the administrative confusion. They routinely demanded special treatment from inexperienced American lieutenants. Many junior officers simply granted these requests to keep the peace. They allowed high-ranking prisoners to retain their luxuries just to avoid a confrontation. They let them occupy grand villas while the common people slept in the dirt. It was easier to look away than to enforce the rules of unconditional surrender. But this specific sector did not belong to a lenient commander. This territory fell under the jurisdiction of the United States Third Army. The men at the top of this chain of command did not believe in comfort for the defeated enemy. They did not tolerate aristocratic privilege while American soldiers stood guard in the freezing rain. The compromise that had been permitted in other towns was about to collide with a very different standard of discipline. The quiet comfort inside the stone villa was drawing to an end as the reality of the muddy courtyard pressed against the glass. Lieutenant Thomas Miller stood in the center of the plush rug, his wet jacket dripping onto the polished oak floorboards. He held his helmet under his arm. Major von Schill did not look up from his crystal wineglass. "I have given you my terms, Lieutenant," the German said. "Sir, my orders are to house the displaced civilians in the municipal buildings." Miller said, "The town hall is full. This villa has 12 empty bedrooms. This villa belongs to a family of the High Prussian nobility." Von Schill replied, "It is not a barracks for peasants. They are refugees, Major." Miller said, "They have been walking for 3 weeks. Half of them are children. It is freezing outside. Then let them find a barn," Von Schill said. "A gentleman does not share his quarters with the unwashed masses. It is a matter of basic human hierarchy. The Geneva Convention allows us to requisition property for emergency shelter," Miller said. "I am instructing you to move your personal belongings to the smaller servant quarters in the back. We need the main house." The German set his glass down on the marble mantelpiece with a sharp click. He stood up straight, adjusting the lapels of his immaculate tunic. "You do not instruct me, Lieutenant," Von Schill said. "You are a schoolteacher from Ohio. You have no lineage. You have no breeding. Your army may have won the tactical battle through sheer numbers, but you do not possess the cultural authority to displace a German officer from his rightful station. I will not move. I will not allow those creatures to cross this threshold." "They are human beings," Miller said. "They are laborers," Von Schill spat. "They are the lower strata of European society. My family has ruled land since the Holy Roman Empire. We do not sleep under the same roof the auxiliary races. If you force them into this house, I will register a formal protest with your high command. Your generals understand the importance of social order. They will not allow a provincial conscript to insult a nobleman." "I am carrying out direct orders from the division staff," Miller said. "Then your division staff lacks refinement," Von Schill answered. "Find another location for your herd. This house remains clear. I will look out my window and see an orderly courtyard, not a gypsy camp. That is my final word on the matter." Miller realized the situation had escalated far beyond his authority to resolve. He could not argue with a man who viewed the world through centuries of unearned privilege. He turned on his heel without saluting. He walked back out into the rain and pulled the radio telephone from the front seat of his command jeep. The report reached Patton within the hour. The rumble of a heavy engine cut through the steady downpour. A lone olive-drab jeep splashed through the mud and stopped directly before the villa gates. General George S. Patton stepped out onto the wet cobblestones. He wore his tailored winter jacket with 4 silver stars gleaming brightly on his collar and helmet. His iconic ivory-handled revolvers rested in their holsters against his hip. He looked at the guards, then walked directly through the front doors without knocking. The room went completely silent. Every American soldier stood straight at attention. Patton did not raise his voice. He walked toward the fireplace where the German sat. Patton studied him for a silent moment. "Did you refuse to vacate these quarters, Major?" Patton asked. "I requested that my status be respected, General," Von Schill said. "Did you refuse to allow the displaced families into this house?" Patton asked. "I stated that a man of my lineage cannot live among laborers," Von Schill answered. "It is a matter of tradition." "So you chose your comfort over my orders," Patton said. "I chose the order of my station," Von Schill said. Patton leaned slightly forward, his voice low and cold. "You talk about your station as if the world cares about your name. Your family crest means nothing to the mud outside this house. You believe you are born to look down on others. You believe your blood makes you clean, and these refugees, dirty. The man guarding your door has a name. His name is Arthur Vance. He is 21 years old. He spent his youth shoveling coal in Kentucky to feed his family. He has a piece of steel in his shoulder right now from fighting your army. He does not have a castle or a crest. He has a dirty uniform and a rifle, but he has earned his place on this ground. You have earned nothing but this cage. You wanted an orderly view from your window. You wanted a clear courtyard. You refused to look at the people who lost everything because of your war. You have two choices now. You can pack your bags and move into the stables with the horses in the next 10 seconds, or you can face the consequence of disobeying a direct order in my theater. Either way, your stay in this grand house is finished today. Decide now. The German officer looked at the ivory revolvers, then down at his polished boots. He remained silent. Patton nodded once to the military policeman, standing near the entrance. They moved forward immediately. They did not touch the Prussian officer, but they picked up his leather trunks and marched out the front door. Von Schill followed them into the cold rain, his head held stiffly. He expected to be led to the officer quarters across the square. Instead, the guards marched him directly to the wooden stables behind the main house. The structure was dark, damp, and smelled heavily of wet straw, manure, and old leather. The military policeman threw open the heavy stable doors and tossed his luggage directly into an empty stall. The floor was covered in mud and soiled bedding. A dozen American soldiers and 20 local villagers gathered in the downpour to watch the aristocrat look at his new quarters. Von Schill stood in his pristine uniform, his polished riding boots sinking into the wet manure. He looked back at the main villa, where the first group of shivering children was already walking through the dry front doors. The refugees looked down at him from the porch. The Prussian officer realized nobody was coming to save his hierarchy. He picked up his soiled leather trunk and stepped inside the dark stall. Arthur Vance returned home to the coal valleys of Hazard, Kentucky, in the spring of 1946. He spent the remainder of his life working as a mechanic, away from the dark dust of the mines. The piece of shrapnel remained lodged in his left shoulder until the day he died in 1988, a constant physical reminder of the heavy price he paid for his country. He never bragged about his service, but his children found a photograph in his desk drawer showing a grand stone villa surrounded by smiling children. Friedrich von Schill was transferred to a formal detention facility. 3 weeks later, he faced an Allied military tribunal in late 1946 for his wartime actions and served 7 years in prison. Following his release, he returned to a rebuilt Germany, but his family estate was lost forever behind the eastern border. He lived out his remaining years in a small apartment in Hamburg, working as a quiet bookkeeper. He died bitter and forgotten in 1974, still holding on to the faded family crest he carried in his breast pocket. General Patton never mentioned the incident in his public briefings or official correspondence. He merely filed a single-page disciplinary report and placed it at the bottom of his desk drawer. He did, however, write a single line in a private letter to his wife later that week. He wrote that a true gentleman is defined by the dirt he is willing to stand in, not the castle he inherits from his ancestors. Some historians have argued that Patton's sharp methods in dealing with defeated aristocratic officers bordered on unnecessary theater. They suggest that these direct, public confrontations did little to alter the overall administrative outcome of the occupation or the wider post-war settlement in Bavaria. They claim his focus on personal conduct distracted from larger strategic challenges. Others argue the exact opposite, maintaining that such clear and immediate actions were absolutely essential to break the centuries-old crust of feudal entitlement that had fueled German militarism. They believe it set a vital standard for the incoming military government. What is certain is that 60 displaced families slept safely in a warm house that night. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same? Or would you have offered the captive officer a softer alternative out of diplomatic protocol? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more true storytelling about what happened when old hierarchies met new realities, make sure to subscribe.